Oh, so the fanfare to celebrate the first night of WOW, Women of the World Festival Year 4. Yes. And I know some of you have been here and are stalwarts, and some of you have just come for the first time this year, but it's immensely exciting. This morning, starting at 9:30, we had really the unfolding story of how excited women and girls and men and boys are about a pivotal change, really, in the language that's being used around a world that still is not equal in any part of the planet. And yet a kind of sudden sense of zest and optimism and determination that's dominoing around the world, because really it's just not suitable. It's not suitable for business, this world, because it is so unequal still. And of course we're in a situation where racial inequality has been called out and named for what it is, and although we're by no means there, everybody is aware that it has to happen. And the same is true for sexual equality. But is it true for female equality? It seems not to be the case yet. There isn't a universal recognition that this is a subject that needs to be tackled by everybody systemically and totally in order to make those massive changes. But the WOW Festival wants to do its bit to raise all the issues about what's not been done to satisfaction yet, but also to celebrate the amazing achievements of girls and women right across the world. In parallel to this event tonight, in the Purcell Room, we have Nabaya, an extraordinary play, a testimony theatre piece done about the Delhi rape and the catalytic effect that had in India and right across the subcontinent, and then on and on. And the women performing that play are themselves survivors of sexual assault, and one particularly demanding role played by a woman who was herself a dowry bride, nearly burnt alive with kerosene. And despite that anguish and disfigurement, she performs her testimony in order to suggest to other women that silence isn't appropriate, that we must all speak out. And we must all speak out. And the word feminism, when we began 4 years ago, we had as one of our sessions, is feminism the new F word? And we did that really because at that point, people were still creating that gesture that says, I'm not a feminist, but, what do I do with my feelings of inequality, etc.? Is it just me? Actually, that fear has gone away. Apparently, the Girl Guides now have a badge for activism. And I think... And if 59% of Mumsnet can say they're feminists, then I should imagine that the pillars are falling away from the establishment around that word. We can reclaim language. Now, who better to talk with us about language and reclaim language and use language and devote time, thought, space and attention to language than 5 female laureates. What an extraordinary moment to be able to have that on this stage. So it would go maybe without comment a few years ago if all 5 had been men. It can't go without comment that all 5 are women, but maybe in the future it'll go without comment, and won't that be good too? But it's going to be an extraordinary evening. I don't want to hold the space any longer. I want to hand it over now. So Theo Dorgan, the Irish poet, is going to be chairing. He's going to be your MC tonight. It's going to be just a delightful evening. And then make sure, whatever you do, when you come to the end of the evening, go and talk to somebody you don't know. Because part of Women of the World actually is to find out about each other's stories. And here there's 900 people and you're all interesting. And some of you don't know each other, do you? You don't all know each other. So put out a friendly gesture and just say hello to somebody that you don't already know. But thank you for coming, and over to Theo.
That's a fine piece of musical irony. Thank you, Don. This wonderful man, John Sampson, is going to bewilder us in the course of the evening with an array of instruments such as you have never seen before. He's going to introduce each poet with a piece of music he has chosen specially for them. I give a great deal of thought to what I was going to say here tonight, and then I decided against all of it when I was sitting outside in the back, because I thought this is a night to speak from the heart. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you tonight, serially, 5 women who have shaped how I imagine the world. 5 women I'm thrilled to call my friends, people who have been my teachers and companions, as they have been for thousands of readers, thousands of school students, thousands of us, all down through the years. I had a perfect opening line, and then I discovered that, not for the first time, Carol Ann Duffy had been here before me. Because I was going to say, women laureates, you wait 400 years, then 5 come along at once. Carol Ann Duffy said that, he said scrupulously. Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill, Irish language poet, probably the preeminent Irish language poet of our time, has a beautiful phrase, Cuireadh Magán ag snámh ar sruth na teangain. I set my poem to swim in the flow of the language. And I think of that poem that she sets out there as a boat, as a craft, that double echo of craft, something that contains and carries, and also the meticulousness with which it's made. And I think that the language comes down to us from the ancestors. But bit by bit, out of habit, we tend to give authority to what begins to look like the mainstream. But there are always undercurrents, deep hidden pools, neglected sidewaters, neglected sources. And in our time, and we do live in an extraordinary time for poetry, the river has changed its course and its nature. Now it carries a great new fleet, boats never seen before, bright in their sails, carrying new stories, new grief and anger to be sure, but new joys and celebrations also. Above all, the stories of lives that for far too long were hidden, suppressed, and forbidden. So we are fortunate, those of us who believe in the necessity of poetry, that we live in a time when new stories are being told, a time when so many gifted women in so many languages, in so many countries, have come into the exercise of their powers. True poetry, I think, is both testament and witness. But true poets do not pursue or advocate for a single overwhelming truth. The business of poetry is with small, ungainsayable truths in all their bewildering variety. And out of that myriad of unshaken truths, between us all, we invent and imagine the ever-changing human story. In our time, and I repeat that story has changed utterly. And I will not put the adjective terrible before the beauty that has been born. Tonight, we have 5 truth-tellers, each very distinct in her voice, distinct in her understanding of the vocation, the calling which has been gifted to them, distinct in the maps of the world that they offer us, but having this in common, that they believe, as most of the official and most of the political world no longer believes, that words must mean something, that we are a storytelling species, that as we tell our stories is how we come to understand ourselves. And the variety, the depth, the richness, the many, many truths of their poems have been, I know, looking around me tonight, as much a stay and a source of sustainment to you as they have been to me, and to so many of their hundreds of colleagues in poetry throughout the world. So our first poet is Gillian Clarke, the national poet of Wales. I am not going to do that terrified thing that people do when they're introducing, the rabbit in the headlight moment, where you recite a whole list of honours, prizes, awards, publications, because we're here for poetry. We're not here for a recitation of those things, and God bless Google. We can all do that for ourselves. But what I thought I'd do when I scrapped the attempt at adopting the hegemonic voice was to find a key poem, or phrase from a poem, or passage from a poem that seems to me a signature of what I love in each of these poets tonight. And I thought immediately of that beautiful poem of Gillian Clarke's for R.S. Thomas when he died. And it ends, God's breathing in space out there, misting the heave of the seas, dark and empty tonight, except for the one frail coracle, borne out to sea, burning. And that image, which comes out of the dawn of history and time in Wales, made fresh and made new, and as an image not just of the soul or spirit or whatever it is of R.S. Thomas being born out into eternity, but also in a craft, that oblique, beautiful reference to the craft he so diligently pursued. Gillian is famous, not to say notorious, for her warm-heartedness, for her kindness to generations of poets who surround her or come after her, and her honouring of the memory of those who have gone before her. She said once, when she was in a piece she wrote about Letter from a Far Country, "Like most writers of poetry and fiction, I use personal experience, research, memory and imagination. It is written in the voice of one imaginary woman on behalf of all women." John is going to play Cumronda to introduce Gillian Clarke. Gillian Clarke.
It's a very strange coincidence, but the first poem I've put on my list to read tonight is the poem for R.S. Thomas, and it's not planned at all. He was, of course, it was his centenary in 2013, and now it is the centenary of the birth of Dylan Thomas. They were born almost in the same year, but R.S. lived a great deal longer than Dylan did. It's just called R.S. His death on the midnight news, suddenly colder. Gold September's driven off by something afoot in the southwest approaches. Gods breathing in space out there, misting the heave of the seas, dark and empty tonight, except for the one frail coracle borne out to sea, burning. My mother was one of 10 children of a farmer born in North Wales, a North Wales farmer. They were poor, and she decided she didn't want to be poor, and she thought part of being poor was speaking Welsh, and part of it was living on a farm in the countryside. So she took off for Manchester to become a nurse and banned Welsh from her life. My teenage rebellion was to learn Welsh. She was very beautiful. She married my father, who was in the BBC, which she thought was the cat's whiskers. And she came from North Wales then to live in Cardiff. And she was a great shopper. And I remember when I was a little 6-year-old standing beside her saying, "Mummy, we don't need one of those. We've got one already." But her tragedy was, I think, that she died before John Lewis opened in Cardiff. She wore stiletto heels even for gardening. She was lovable, beautiful, silly, snobbish, aspirational, and anti-Welsh. Once I was on the radio and she said, after she heard me, "Very nice, dear, not too Welsh." The habit of light. In the early evening, she liked to switch on the lamps in corners, on low tables, to show off her brass, her polished furniture, her silver and glass. At dawn, she'd draw all the curtains back for a glimpse of the cloud-lit sea. Her oak floors flickered in an opulence of beeswax and light. In the kitchen, saucepans danced their lids. The kettle purred on the aga, supper on its breath, and the buttery melt of a pie. And beyond the swimming glass of old windows, in the deep perspective of the garden, a blackbird singing. She'd come through the bean rows in tottering shoes, her pinny full of strawberries, a lettuce, bringing the palest potatoes in a colander, her red hair bright with her habit of colour, her habit of light. The rest of my list today comes from my collection, Ice, most recently published collection. I loved the beauty of those snowy winters we had, not this year, but the year before, the year before, the year before that. And there was one winter when, one of those snowy times, when I was marooned, before Christmas, the snow came very early, marooned in a 12th floor flat in Cardiff, while home, which is in Ceredigion in West Wales, my husband was at home, and we just were mobile phoning the snowy scenes, and I was just longing to get home, but at least we could communicate our separate impressions of this wonderful miracle of the snow and the ice. The River Ely in Cardiff froze solid. Ice music. Locked 12 floors up above the frozen Ely, I show you the silver bones of the river afloat on black water. 100 miles away, checking the sheep late, you show me the light of the full moon through the larches, magnified in every lengthening snow lens. Stretched between us across the cryosphere, white counties, fields, towns, motorway, blocked B-roads, the deepening geography of snow. We both hear the music, the high, far hum of ice, strung sound, featherfall, a sigh of rhyme, fog-blurred syllables of trees, sapped, stilled to stone. Morning and evening, a moan of expanding ice, a timpani of plates colliding, a cry of icicles tonguing the flutes of our tin roof. Just a week before Christmas, this went on for a week or two, just a few days really before the last week before Christmas, it seemed as if the snow was going to stop falling. Because in Britain, you know, it never snows, does it? More than a week and then it melts. Not that year. Home for Christmas. A pause in the blizzard, and you fetch me home by motorway and marble corridor. The last hill from Blindglowan slippery slow. The car crawls slipshod to the door. Tonight we lie together, listening as miles of silence deepen to the coast. Snow blinds the roof lights, roads forget themselves to north and east. I sleep, wake, sleep again, dreaming in stories, turning, landlocked in a myth, our white room drifted deep in moonwork of the silversmith. All night, a breath from the east drives drifts off the fields through the avenue of beach to fill the lane with waves of a frozen sea, so wild and still by morning nothing can pass. We rise, dress, light fires, carry hay to 12 ewes waiting hungry at the gate. Birds gather in the garden for their feed of crumbs, crusts, peelings, nuts and seed. Our wild, tame neighbours, fellow inhabitants, I, my scattering hands in hunger's silence. I set soup simmering, dough rising in a bowl, as in the old days in our early glow, like being new here in this house, this place, like being young and bold, bravely in love, like staying alive and brazening out the ice and snow, like being up for it, the shove to sharpen up, to take the great adventure of living the difficult day, the glamour. There's one now which is partly in Welsh, but the Welsh is easy because it's just the first lines of each of the marriage vows. Carol Ann asked lots of poets to repeat their vows for a page in The Guardian of faithful lovers of various kinds, married and unmarried. So you just have to guess what this means, but it is gwell, gwaith means for better, for worse, and the others are just the first line of each marriage vow. Ar fodrwy hon i'th briadaf. Something about the ring in the blackbird's eye on an April evening, the raptor's jeweled stare, the marriage of sun and rain on dancing water, the circle of my arms round sheets off the line, yours bringing armfuls of wood for the fire. Am corff i'th amrhydethaf. Something of touch, taste, tongue, the language of hands, those chemical gifts one to the other, grace and gesture, silence, reflection, the pair for life, two swans on a river, soundlessly sculling the stream, lover to lover. Am holl olid bodel i'th gynnisgaethaf. My dowry, a derelict house on a hill, 5 fields, 2 acres of bluebells under oaks. Yours, a vision. You made sound the ruin, dreamed space and light, a room of oak and glass, let in the sky, the hills, and all of Ceredigion, Cariad, in a glance. Cariad is darling. I love blue. My mother loved blue, and she had a dark blue satin dance dress. Also, my father, sometimes we went into his office on a Saturday or a Sunday to check things, and if he didn't want me hanging around, he'd dump me in the National Museum and Gallery in Cardiff, and I went straight always to see Renoir's La Parisienne, known also as the Blue Lady, very popular on cards. So, blue, and the poem is Bluebells, because after the snowy poems, I thought you needed warming up. Which came first, scent or heart-burst of blues? Cerulean, indigo, sky, a breath of rain, sunlight between stems of sessile oaks, before the wood breaks leaf, when trees first feel a quickening in their roots, the shift and stir of bulbs swelling beneath the earth. The ink blue dark of an icy night of stars, last snow gone from the shadowed side of a wood, Porthkerry, forest, allt, Blaencourt. Or long ago when folds of a satin dance dress fell about me like a drench of water, when I hid in her dark wardrobe from their storms. Or the still, sweet blues of La Parisienne's gown, in one of those still hours in the gallery, and I, a child alone in a room of treasure. After the bitter cold it comes again, this dream of blue breaking in the wood, in a long flood about the ankles of oaks. The drowning satins of cool blue in a wardrobe, beauty and grief and every blue in the world in each drooping head of bells. At a poem I wrote for the 50-year anniversary of the last big coal accident in South Wales. It happened on the 28th of June 1960, so I wrote it within the last, 50 years plus, 2010. Always the names of coal mining disasters are beautiful because they're named for the villages where they happened, and this village was called Six Bells. Beautiful name. My lovely late father-in-law was captain of the miners' rescue team for that area. He was a coalface worker in the colliery at Oakdale, not very far away from Six Bells. When I was asked to write this by the BBC, I decided to imagine one person that day which was a very beautiful summer's day. 6 bells. Perhaps a woman hanging out the wash paused, hearing something, a sudden hush, a pulse inside the earth like a blow to the heart, holding in her arms the wet weight of her wedding sheets, his shirts. Perhaps heads lifted from the work of scrubbing steps, hands stilled from wringing rainbows onto slate, while below the town, deep in the pit, a rockfall struck a spark from steel and fired the void, punched through the mine a fist of blazing fire damp. As they died, perhaps a silence before sirens cried, before the people gathered in the streets, before she'd finished hanging out her sheets. And finally, another one which Carol Ann asked me to produce for one of her ventures, one of her editing ventures. This was from Jubilee Lines, produced for the Queen's Jubilee, and she gave 60 poets, or herself and 59 others, a date, a year, and she gave me 1955. It was a good year for me because it was my last year, a good year for me to think about and to remember, because it was my last year as a schoolgirl. And I seem to remember a hot month at least of summer weather in which I have to say that what made it, I was just dying to get out into the world and begin to live. And the worst thing was, I was in a convent boarding school. And I really worried that all the lovely boys would be taken by the prettiest girls who'd left the year before. I just thought there'd be nobody left to me at all. And so a friend and I mean, when we were in that school, I just remember how much attention the window cleaner got. Got really, really excited, or people delivering groceries to the school, thrilled to bits if they were at least men. So my friend and I decided, not with our heads, but with our whole selves, to get out, to run away, to bunk off. My school was in Porthcawl in South Wales, and it was quite near to the sea, and we ran through the sand dunes to the sea. Running away to the sea, 1955. It might have been heat stroke, the unfocused flame of desire for a name in a book, a face on the screen, the anonymous object of love. 2 schoolgirls running like wildfire, bunking off through dunes to the sea, breathless. We were lost and free, east of Eden. It was James Dean, Elvis, Bill Haley and the Comets. It was Heartbreak Hotel on the gramophone. It was Heathcliff by torchlight, in bed after lights out. The dunes were molten glass. We slowed to a dawdle, rippling sand with our toes, grains of gold through our fingers, on our skin, in our hair, without words to say why or who or where. This I remember. The hour was still. Bees browsing sea lavender, and beyond the dunes the channel as blue as the Gulf of Araby, a name from the drowse of a daydreaming lesson. Sun on the board, the chalk, sister's hand, a faraway voice as if heard through water, murmuring rosaries. Egypt, the Red Sea, the Bitter Lakes, Suez, a psalm of biblical names called geography. That was the last day the world stood still. In a year, there'd be tanks in Budapest, over Sinai, bombers on the move, and I'd be in the streets in the march against war as empires loosened their grip. It was almost like love. Thank you.
Gillian Clarke, the National Poet of Wales. At a celebration of contemporary British poetry in Buckingham Palace last November, Sinéad Morrissey read with others, and afterwards Prince Philip came to her and asked, "And did you write that all by yourself?" Well, she did. And she has written poems that no one had ever thought to write before, and likely never will write again. I first met Sinead Morrissey, she was 18. She was the youngest ever winner of the Patrick Kavanagh Award, an award given in Ireland for an unpublished first collection. And I was struck by the air of self-possession. And a couple of years later, she was a student in Trinity, and I asked her, "Are you ready to publish that?" And she just looked at me calmly and said, "I've dumped all those, they weren't any good." And I thought, this is the real thing, this is serious. And how right I was. Not something I get to say very often. Sinead was raised in Belfast. She spent some time in New Zealand and in Japan. She is now a very well-loved and respected teacher of creative writing in the Heaney Centre in Belfast. She is deeply conscious of where she is, always. But she brings a particular sensibility, an unwillingness, it seems to me, ever, not just to take, but even to consider or countenance the easy option. She has a sense of the light in things and a sense of the dark in things, but an absolute refusal to be co-opted into anybody else's script. She knows, as all real poets do, that we're here to find out, we're here to discover what is it, this strange gift of life that we've been given. She has taken us on remarkable journeys in her collections so far, the most recent of which, as I'm sure you all know, won the 2014 T.S. Eliot Award. And thinking, a poem of hers that I keep thinking about because it keeps opening out new layers is Lighthouse, and the middle of the 3 stanzas reads, "Across the loch, where ferries venture blithely, and once a cruise ship, massive as a palace, inched its brilliant decks to open sea, a lighthouse starts its own night-long address in fractured signalling. It blinks and bats the swing ball of its beam, then stands to catch, then hurls it out again beyond its parallax." And obliquely, perhaps, everything that I love in Sinead's poems is in there. The fidelity to the place, the understanding of the power of an image, in this case the lighthouse, but then the precise attention to the way the lighthouse beam moves and goes. And just when you're happily in that material reality, she bats it out beyond its parallax, and your mind goes travelling into places it never suspected. I think she's a remarkably gifted poet. And to introduce her, John proposes to play for our delectation and entertainment the second part of the Belfast Hornpipe. Sinead Morrissey.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Theo. It's lovely to be here. I'm very honoured to be reading with these fantastic women and as part of this brilliant festival. I thought I'd begin with my one and only villanelle. Genetics. My father's in my fingers, but my mother's in my palms. I lift them up and look at them with pleasure. I know my parents made me by my hands. They may have been repelled to separate lands, to separate hemispheres, may sleep with other lovers, but in me they touch where fingers link to palms. With nothing left of their togetherness but friends who quarry for their image by a river, at least I know their marriage by my hands. I shape a chapel where a steeple stands, and when I turn it over, my father's by my fingers, my mother's by my palms, demure before a priest reciting psalms. My body is their marriage register. I reenact their wedding with my hands. So take me with you, take up the skin's demands for mirroring in bodies of the future. I'll bequeath my fingers if you bequeath your palms. We know our parents make us by our hands. Thank you. I am a great fan of William Thackeray's novel Vanity Fair, and in it the really washed-out sort of heroine, Amelia Sedley. Her husband died 2 weeks after they got married at the Battle of Waterloo, though she was pregnant by the time of his death. And her husband's best friend, William Dobbin, has loved Amelia for 14 years. And she's been happy enough to have William Dobbin as a friend, but nothing more. And then he finally has had enough, and he says to Amelia, you know what? You aren't actually worthy of my love. And he leaves. She's in Belgium at the time. And at that moment, of course, Amelia realises what she's lost in the wonderful figure of William Dobbin. And we're told by William Thackeray that Amelia writes Dobbin a letter, but he doesn't tell us what the letter said. So I decided to write the letter. Vanity Fair. Dearest William, I could begin by hoping you are well in England, and I do, now that the regiment has returned to Chatham. Or I could begin by telling you that reports of worsening weather here are true, that Georgie thinks you wicked and unkind for leaving him, that your former servants pine, or that father, though no better, is no worse, etc. But this is not a weather talk sort of letter. It is after 3. The whole house sleeps, even Becky, and I am kept awake 6 weeks by your crippling absence, an irony, I confess, since for all your years of passionate presence, I failed to cherish you. Now that you're gone, Becky, and you were right about her all along, keeps dreadful company, boorish men who jest and drink and flirt, and she isn't in the slightest shocked by any of it. I keep to my room. I have placed the portrait of George face down on the dresser. I have folded the gloves you left in an innermost drawer, as though they were a gift. Since you spoke of my incapacity for love, I have come to see how my own fierce widowhood was a shell against the world, a kind of carapace made up of pride, stupidity, and cowardice, a stay, if you will, against the kind of attachment such as yours for me deserved. Poor shredded raiment, for if it did not keep me warm, it kept me safe. Safe against you and safe against myself. Last year at the opera, it was Dido and Inez. I wished to take your hand in a sudden, artless, harmless way that would not give you pause, then didn't. I think I must have sensed the charge built up from a decade's loving in your fingers, though there you sat as solid as an anchor, and feared that touching it would knock me flat. Now I'm scared I shall die without it. Dear Dobbin, come back. Like everything else we do in our mingled, muddy lives, this letter is overdue. Forgive me if my love arrives belatedly, but there is a ship can get you here by Friday, and come all the rain in Christendom, I shall be waiting for you by the viewing platform. Dearest William, put out to sea. Yours, Amelia Sedley. There were two enterprising businessmen at the turn of the last century in England called Mitchell and Kenyon. And when cinema was still a very new phenomenon, they had this great business idea that they would go and film as many people as possible and then go to the fair in the local town and set up a little makeshift cinema and charge people a penny to come in and see themselves. And unwittingly, they left behind a complete portrait of Edwardian life in these islands. And the films were abandoned for decades and lost, and were discovered again, stored in milk churns at the back of a chemist's shop, and they've since been restored lovingly by the British Film Institute. This poem is about one of their factory gate frame movies, and they would go to the north of England and the mill towns, because they wanted to get as many people as possible in a single shot so that they could then charge all those people to come and see themselves. So the perfect place for them to do a film would be at a factory gate, preferably after the end of a shift. And this poem is about one of those factory gate frames. Electric Edwardians. They're here to make money, the men distinguished from the crowds they move among by white hats and walking sticks, to capture as many people as possible for their fairground bioscope shows. Come see yourselves on the screen as living history. And history sets up its Nordenograph and rolls and vacuums in the girls in shawls, the men and boys in caps, the entire rollicking sea of spinners and doffers and little tenters, departing the factory gates at 6 like a nation's exodus. Everyone wears clogs. Everyone has a dinner to get to. But the dock of a quarter day's pay for a minute of horseplay is no longer over their heads, and so they jostle momentarily, blurred face by blurred face, to smile or to bow for the transmission of grace in the space near the cinematographer, as though the camera cast out a fraught pool of light in exchange for their imprint, and they are standing in it. The women loiter less. A handful of men doff caps, then laugh, or shake incredibly wide white handkerchiefs at whoever may prove their witness. Themselves, their wives, coal miners, tram conductors, Boer War veterans, Lloyd George in the wings. Who knows the king? Not to mention the unthinkable yet to be born, not to mention me. And always, in every factory gate frame, like an offering up of driftwood out of the indeterminate mass after its comb and polish, or the crystallization of salt from a smoky suspension, children linger longest in the foreground, shoving, lampooning, breaking the line, or simply staring back at us across the lens's promise, as though we still held Passchendaele in our pockets and could find a way to save them. They grin and grin, not yet, not yet, while in a corner of the screen a cart horse stumbles, flickers, flashes into darkness, where the celluloid nitrate stock rubbed off inside the milk churn. I read Dorothy Wordsworth's journals a few years ago and was amazed by how brilliant they were and how much William stole. So this poem is attempting to be a diary entry by Dorothy over 3 parts of one day. 1801. A beautiful cloudless morning, my toothache better. William at work on the peddler. Miss Gell left a basket of excellent lettuces. I shelled our scarlet beans. Walked out after dinner for letters. Met a man who had once been a captain begging for alms. The afternoon, airy and warm, no letters. Came home via the lake, which was near turquoise and startled by summer geese. The soles on this year's boots are getting worn. Heard a tiny, wounded yellow bird sounding its alarm. William as pale as a basin, exhausted with altering. I boiled up pears with cloves. Such visited evenings are sharp with love, I almost said, dear, look. Either moonlight on Grasmere like herrings, or the new moon holding the old moon in its arms. And I'm going to finish with a poem that was commissioned by Theo, and he asked us to write a poem based on an object held in the National Museum of Ireland. So I went down on the train one sunny day to find an object, and I found these little shabti carvings in the Egyptian section. And the shabti carvings all had baskets and hoes and implements to do work. And I was reading that in the Egyptian idea of the afterlife, you know, you had to do work, you had to give up your free time and plough the fields. So the clever Egyptians thought that if they had a little replica of themselves with a tool, that they could do all the work for them. And sorry, you could just hang back and relax. The House of Osiris in the Field of Reeds, and I'd like to read it for Theo. I'm turning 40, not on my birthday, still as I write 6 weeks away, but over months. It's like a migraine, that sludgy disconnectedness starting in the brain hours before the hammering. I've forgotten my name and my husband's name in the run-up to the full-scale meltdown. All through last winter, each day made to bear the pressure of impending loss. Soon it will no longer be like this. The lean girls picnicking in the park, their haul of charity shop dresses at their feet, listening to the Smiths, have long since picked themselves up and vanished down the tall grass corridor of rooks and smoke. I can no longer remember their faces, or what the sky over Dublin inscribed on my skin the year I just left home, or even the impact of first-time proper sex, of being unwrapped. But turning 40 banishes my younger self to a separate outhouse, somewhere stony and impassable, hot, fly-infested, like the city of Tetu on the Nile, which became the other world for all of Egypt, and I cannot get across. Death was so much closer then, of course. I'd be dead already, or at least a grandmother. If rich, I'd have my orders pre-prepared for the sarcophagus maker, the shabti carver, the weaver of the shroud. I'd have selected the spells from my coffin lid, the amulets required to survive the guarded entrances of the afterlife, the tricky test with hearts and feathers. O exiled one, so you may escape the heat and torpor of that barren place and pass instead to the field of reeds and do no work there. Discover by your grave cloths a replica of yourself in turquoise faience fashioned with a basket. Here it says, I'll do it. Take me. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And yes, she wrote them all herself. And just think of all the poems to come. Such wonders to anticipate. The first time I heard the name of Liz Lochhead, a friend had said, "You must read this wonderful woman." And I probably did that, the eyebrow thing where you're saying, and? I said, well, she's written a play called Mary Queen of Scots Got Her Head Chopped Off. And I thought, what a bloody marvellous title. It really was. And, it's funny, almost everything of Liz is in that title. I mean, the wickedness, the clarity, the directness, the interest in history. But there's so much more to her than that. Those are some of her great strengths as a dramatist and as a poet. But there's a tenderness and a sense of common cause and common purpose in the plays and in the poems. When Liz Lochhead was appointed Scottish Machel, she said, "I am as delighted as I am surprised by this enormous honour, which I know I don't deserve." Well, she does. "Nevertheless, I accept it on behalf of poetry itself, which is and always has been the core of our culture, and in grateful recognition of the truth that poetry, the reading of it, the writing of it, the saying it out loud, the learning of it off by heart, matters deeply to ordinary Scottish people everywhere, and not just to the Scots." As she wrote when accepting the post of Poet Laureate for Glasgow, "All praise to poetry, the way it has of attaching itself to a familiar phrase in a new way, insisting it be heard and seen. Poets need no laurels, surely. Their poems, when they can make them happen, even rarely, crown them with green. But poets do not need nor do they seek laurels, but when they are granted, it is because they are deserved and more than deserved, and I can think of no living Scottish poet who more deserves the title of Scottish Machel." And to introduce her, I told her to keep an eye on the instruments, by the way. Watch this one now. "Ye banks and braes." The very wonderful Liz Lochhead.
Thank you. Theo, thank you so very much. And thank you, James Runcie, my great friend, and Jude Kelly for inviting me here tonight. What a wow of a night, right enough. I'm going to start off with a little poem, just a wee bilingual poem. It's called Kids' Poem, Bairn Sang. And it's just to say, if at first you don't understand it, relax. All will become clear, or not. It was January, and a gey dreich day the first day I went to the school, so my mum happed me up in my good navy blue napcoat with a red tartan hood, birled a scarf around my neck, put on my pixie and my pockies, it was that bitter, said, "Noo you'll no starve," gied me a wee kiss and a kid-on scalp in the bum and sent me off across the playground to the place I'd learned to say. It was January, and a really dismal day the first day I went to school. So my mother wrapped me up in my best navy blue topcoat with the red tartan hood, twirled a scarf around my neck, pulled on my bubble hat and mittens, it was so bitterly cold, said, "Now you won't freeze to death," gave me a little kiss and a pretend slap on the bottom, and sent me off across the playground to the place I'd learned to forget to say. It was January, and a gey dreich day, the first day I went to the school. So my mum happed me up in my good navy blue napcoat with a red tartan hood, birled a scarf around my neck, put on my pixie and my pockies. It was that bitter. Oh, saying it was one thing, but when it came to writing it, in black and white, the way it had to be said, was as if you were posh, grown up, male, English, and dead. Oh, thank you very much. You mustn't clap the individual poems. They get all very jealous of each other, honestly. It's really fine. That's actually not a little autobiographical poem. It's autobiographical elements. I did have that quote. But my grandmother spoke like that rather than my mother. It's a bit of a kind of compression. It was written to encourage children all over Britain to keep writing, at least creatively, 9-year-olds and so on, to write at least creatively in hometown English, they were calling it at that point. And I'm pleased to say that I've heard that that poem's been translated into Birmingham Black Patois and also into Cornish, not the Cornish language that only 12 people speak and makes Gaelic sound like a kind of world dominator, but into just, Cornish English dialect. So it's not because I hold a brief for Scots more than any other language. Like my friend Tom Leonard says, all living language is sacred. And this one, I think, is a voice that this person speaking, and I think he's a male, but it's a male or a female adolescent. That last poem is a first to phone call poem. I was asked by a BBC producer to write something to encourage children to keep writing in hometown English. The next one was the kind of laureate job. They phone you up and say, would you write a poem about? And like Gillian Clarke said yesterday to me when we were talking on the radio down the line, she too finds that a stimulus. Why not have a go? So this is a poem that I wouldn't have written had I not been asked to write something to encourage people to join lay members of the children's panel in Scotland. And that's a very good system we have where a child who's committed a crime or is the victim of a crime or neglect is treated in exactly the same way as a child in trouble. The poem's called, Listen, trouble is not my middle name. It is not what I am. I was not born for this. Trouble is not a place, though I am in it, deeper than the deepest wood, and I'd get out of it, who wouldn't? If I could. Hope is what I do not have in hell, not without good help now. Could you listen hard and well to what I cannot say except by what I do? And when you say I do it for badness, this much is true. I do it for badness done to me before any badness that I do to you. Hard to unfankle this. But you can help me, maybe. Loosen all these knots and really listen. I cannot plainly tell you this, but if you care, then beyond all harm and hurt, real hope is there. Theo mentioned a play called Mary Queen of Scots Got Her Head Chopped Off, which was not entirely a history play. It's a play about women in power, I suppose, and I think of this, although it's the opening speech of it, I think of this as a poem, really. So I'm going to do the opening speech of Mary Queen of Scots Got Her Head Chopped Off. Corby, the chorus figure, La Corby, in black, ragged costume. She might be a crow, she might be a person, she's certainly an immortal. She's kind of one of those strange figures in drama like Ariel or Caliban or one of these people. They're very concrete, but are they a creature of the air? This is Corby speaking, and our speech is called Scotland, What Like? Country, Scotland, what like is it? It's a peat bog, it's a dark forest, it's a cauldron o' lie, a salt pan, or a coal mine. If you're guy lucky, it's a bonny bricht-beer meadow or a park o' kye, or maybe it's a field of stains. It's a tenement or a merchant's hall. It's a hoorhouse or a humble cot, Princess Street or Paddy's Market. It depends. It depends. I dinna ken what like your Scotland is. Here's mine's. National flower, the thistle. National pastime, nostalgia. National weather smear, hard drizzle, snow. National bird, the corby, the crow, la corbeille, le corbeau, moi. how me, eh, voice like a choked laugh, ragbag o' a bird in my black dad's, all angles and elbows and broken Oxford feathers, black beady een in my executioner's hood, no bra, but I think I hear sort of black glamour. Do I no put you in mind of the skating minister? Or, on the other fit, the parish priest, the dirty beast? My nests are Richolas sticks. I live on lamb's eyes and road accidents. Oh, see, after the battle, man, it's a pure feast. My eyes are ever big even for my belly. In lean years apiece, my belly thinks my throat's been cut. Oh, see, once upon a time, there were 12 queens on the one green island, and the one green island was split into 12 kingdoms. But no equal kingdoms. Nobody in their right mind would insist on that. For the northern kingdom was cold and small, and the people were low-statured and ignorant and feared of their lords and poor. They were starving. And their queen was beautiful and tall and fair and Frenchified. The other kingdom in the island was large and prosperous, with wheat and barley and fat kye in their fields and wool in their looms and beer in their barrels, and at the mouth of her greatest river, a great port, a glistening city that sucked all wealth to its centre, which was a palace and a court of a queen. She was a cousin, a clever cousin, a wee bit older, and maybe no so braw as the other queen, but a queen nevertheless, queen o' a country with an army and a navy and dominion over many lands. 12 queens, one green island. Caw, caw, caw. I'm not obsessed with either Scotland or women to the extent that I never write about men. This is about some men that I love very much. I wrote it for a man that I loved very much. Way back when I was doing a show with my late great friend Michael Mara. The show was called In Flagrant Delict, because Michael thought that was a good name for a one-man, one-woman show. And I wrote this poem for him. He was a songwriter and wrote both the words and the music. So this is Ira and George. I love all the American classic songwriters. The Jerome Kerns, the Lawrence Harts, the Cole Porters. He was not Jewish like most of them. They were mostly Jewish and first-generation English speakers. And they were in love with the whole American language. And out of that, they made poetry to tear your heart apart. And Ira Gershwin wasn't just one of my favourite song lyricists, he was one of my favourite poets of the 20th century. So here's Ira and George for Michael Mara. First the phone call, as the man said, and he sure said a mouthful to that which comes first, words or music question. Who knows? Except for every good one, there are 10 in the trash. Songs you slaved over that just won't sing, in which no lover ever will hear some wisecrack twist itself to tell his unique heartbreak. So sore, so personal, he can't stop humming it. The simplest 3-chord melody might have legs once it's got the lyric, not tunesmiths, ham and eggs. Each catchphrase, colloquialism, each cliche, each snatch of overheard on the subway or street can say so much when rhymed right, when phrased just so to fit its own tune that was born for it. A Manhattan night in 29 or 30. It's late. You're reading Herrick. Just back from a party, your brother calls out, "Hey, let's work." You watch him shuck his jacket, loose his black tie, and grab your book. "Gather your rosebuds," he says, and slams it shut. He's right, hard against the deadline, and at night, shoes off, moon up, just daring you, piano open. That's when you two can make it happen. The tune that smells like an onion, play it very slow, then the one that sounds like the Staten Island ferry till you hear the words. Brother, they're already there under the siren, and the train, and the cab horn blare of his endless possibilities that will only fit its own fine-tuned lyric that is born for it. And this is a small elegy, a wee small lyric in Elegy of My Mother. It describes a universal, I think, experience. It's just called Sorting Through. It's my penultimate. The moment she died, my mother's dance dresses turned from the colours they really were to the colours I imagined them to be. I can feel the weight of bump-toed silver shoes swinging from their ankle straps as she swaggers up the path towards her dad, light-headed from airman's kisses. Here, at what I'll have to learn to call my father's house, yes, every ragbag scrap of duster prints her, even more vivid than an Ilford snapshot, on some seafront in a white cardigan and that exact frock. Old lipsticks, liquid stockings, labels like Harella, Gorée, Bercatex, and as I manhandle whole outfits into bin bags for Oxfam, every mote in my eye is a utility mark. And this is useful. The sadness of dispossessed dresses, the decency of good coats, round-shouldered in the darkness of wardrobes, the gravitas of lapels, the invisible danders of skin fizzing off from them, like all that life that will not neatly end. And this one, to finish off with, is another one of these men. I kind of wrote a little book of men at one point, and I wanted to write something that was some sort of song, really, of some easing from grief. And I thought it was a pity there wasn't a lucky figure there. The way that you can get a chimney sweep at weddings, and he's in all the photographs. So that everybody's uncle could make a dirty joke like, "You'll get your chimney swept good and proper tonight, darling," and stuff like that. And that they looked dangerous with their black smuts against the white lace of the wedding dress. So there they were, a kind of primitive good luck figure, a Hanseling. And I thought, there is that person at a funeral, even although he has left the premises, that good man, before the mourners sit down together for their funeral tea. Once I knew who he was, it was easy to write his ballad. This is the baker. I am as lucky for a funeral as a sweep is at a wedding, when with his red eyes, furred brush and burnt smell, he blesses bridal lace with his soil and smirching. Thus do my work night whites, the cracks on my dusted boots, my overall trousers of flower-stiffened linen, Hansel, your black ties and pressed morning suits. Although I am not by your side, nor does anyone photograph my or that rawest absence, dawn delivery to this hotel had me shoulder those boards of my generous dozens, as all week neighbours came. With baked stuffs, up the saddest path to your door, wanting to bring something sweet and light to where nothing can be so anymore. But now I sleep on sacks washed soft, while your time at the cold grave over, or after that stare at the core of the terrible oven, take tea and funeral cakes together. Let sober girls in black and white replenish plates, and freshen up the cooling cups with warm, as if tomorrow could rise and prove. Like yeast could rise and prove. I say, such crumbs do no harm. In nights while I will work and you will grieve, weak tea, sudden hunger for the heel of a new loaf, white dawn and the surprise of appetite will have you tear a lump of goodness off. Sooner, later, a new season's wind will lift, though it may be many daily loaves from this dark hour, as you let go, fling, and feel the ashes sift around your footsteps like spilt flour. Thank you very much.
Setting my mind's eye free to find a phrase or a verse from Paula Meehan by way of introduction, I came across or settled on an excerpt from literacy class, South Inner City. Late November, the dark chill of the room, Christmas looming and none of us well fixed. We bend each evening in scarves and coats to the work of mending what is broken in us. Without tricks, without wiles, with no time to waste now, we plant words on these blank fields. It is an unmapped world, and we are pioneering agronomists launched onto this strange planet, the sad flag of the home place newly furled. When Paula Meehan and other writers, men and women of her generation, came to poetry, the givers of permission, and it's always interesting to see what they don't talk about, did not understand that class is an issue, that poverty is an issue, that being silenced is an issue, that gender is an issue. And so Paula, like so many of her contemporaries, had to break new ground from the start. In Paula's case, she was starting from perhaps the most impoverished part of our capital city, a part that has been successively neglected ever since it was shelled during the Easter Rising and has been shamefully neglected by successive native governments ever since. And it was natural, and it seemed natural to Paula, and it seemed to her a responsibility which the power and gift of language had given her to speak out of her own people and in their voices and to tell their stories. But the explainers who will settle on that as a way of containing, because there's always a set of explainers who try to contain the new poetry, they missed the devotion to the poetry of Gary Snyder. They missed the devotion to the poetry of Anna Akhmatova, that world-girdling impulse that has shaped and nurtured her poetry, that sense that we are strangers in a strange world and here to make the best fist we can of it, of making our home here. She has been remarkably well loved. She'll kill me for saying this, but it is an objective and demonstrable fact, so I'll take refuge in fact. Last week in Dublin, she gave, as she is obliged to do as the Ireland Professor of Poetry, a public lecture, and the title was Imaginary Bonnets with Real Bees in Them. And I'm sure the professional academics among us are familiar with the phenomenon, but that was the first time I had ever seen an instant hair-trigger, spontaneous standing ovation for a lecture. Paula's favourite review of her work was given to her by some neighbouring children who approached her, and just as Carol Ann and our other poets tonight are on GCSE and old A levels, and Paula's poems are on what we call the Leaving Certificate, and they came to her and said, "Paula, is that really your poem on the Leaving Cert?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, we love it." "Thanks very much." "Yeah, it's lovely and short." And Paula told me the reason she loves that among all the reviews she's had is that she had felt such guilt that she might have been part of the murder machine of inflicting poetry on children. But if they loved it for being short, by God, they could quote it. And that, my friends, tells us something. John has chosen to introduce Paula Meehan with Planksty Irwin. Paula Meehan.
Thanks very much, Theo. Thank you. It's great to be here, not just because we're all swinging our laurel leaves tonight, but because I've soldiered long in the minds of poetry with all these women. So it's brilliant. This is a historic occasion, without a doubt, and I hope it presages more prominence for women poets in the times to come. I thought I'd start with a lullaby because Dublin now is such a multicultural city, and everywhere I go on the Dart and on the buses, on the Lewis, our trams, the mothers, generally mothers, are lulling the babies with the lullabies in every tongue imaginable, in Mandarin, in Yoruba, in Igbo, in Latvian, in Russian, in Polish. It's just really like Finnegan's Wake, come home to the city at last. So this is just a lullaby I wrote for my sister when she arrived in the door one summer's day, and the response from the parents was, "You're what?" So she was 16, still a baby herself. Lullaby. My sister is sleeping and makes small murmurs. As she turns in a dream, she is swinging a child under the shade of a lilac tree blooming in a garden in springtime. My sister is sleeping. The rain falls on Finglas to each black roof. It lashes a story of time on the ocean, of moon on the river, and flashes down drain pipes into deep gutters. My sister is sleeping, her arms full of blossom, plucked for the child who dreams in her womb, rocked in tall branches, close to the stars, where my sister is sleeping within her small child. I'm going to go straight into two poems that I got from my grandmother. Her voice, even though she died in the late 80s, her voice is with me all the time on a daily basis. So, and in fact, I heard from the wings in Theo's beautiful introduction that he spoke about this little poem that was inflicted on a generation of Irish school children. It's, would you jump into my grave as quick? Would you jump into my grave as quick, my granny would ask when one of us took her chair by the fire. You, woman, done up to the nines, red lips come on, your breath reeking of drink, and your black eye on my man tonight in a Dublin bar. Think first of the steep drop, the 6 dark feet. Thank you. And this, a memory of her voice, one November when the report into clerical sex abuse was published in the Diocese of Ferns down in Wexford. And it was dark November, I was listening to the radio and I heard my grandmother's voice, her wise, wonderful, powerful, salty voice of the inner city of Dublin. And my grandmother was quite typical of that generation of women who were very devoted to Our Lady and to the church, to the holy space of the church. And I spent a lot of my childhood on my knees before the statues, lighting candles. And but she was also absolutely anti-clerical. Hannah, grandmother, and this is dedicated to Hannah McCabe, my young friend, who I think is in the audience tonight. Coldest day yet of November, her voice close in my ear. Tell them priests nothing. Was I 12, 13? Filthy-minded. Keep your sins to yourself. Don't be giving them a thrill, dirty-minded old feckers. As close as she came to the birds and the bees on her knees in front of the Madonna, Our Lady of the Facts of Life, beside the confessional, oak door closing like a coffin lid, neatly carpentered, waxed and buffed. In the well-made box of this poem, her voice dies. She closes her eyes and lowers her brow to her joined hands, prays hard, woman to woman. And this is a poem called Folktale. I think every generation has to make it new, has to make it sound new. But I think what we code as poets, even unbeknownst to ourselves, are ancient things and hard-won truths. So this is Folktale. A young man falls in love with truth and searches the wide world for her. He finds her in a small house, in a clearing, in a forest. She is old and stooped. He swears himself to her service, to chop wood, to carry water, to collect the root, the stem, the leaf, the flowering top, the seed of each plant she needs for her work. Years go by. One day the young man wakes up longing for a child. He goes to the old woman and asks to be released from his oath so that he may return to the world. Certainly, she says, but on one condition. You must tell them that I am young and that I am beautiful. This next poem is a poem called Home, and I got it after being sent out on tour in the north of Ireland, just before the first ceasefire. So it was around 1994. That ceasefire didn't hold, but the subsequent one, touch wood, is holding, more or less. But it was a very dark time. It was November again, and the light was hard won to stay in it. It got dark very early, and I was travelling around different venues, theatres, community centres, back rooms of pubs, and everywhere I went, the musicians, the guys and women playing the tunes. The tunes could be owned by everyone, really. However, the words, once I opened my mouth, all my cultural baggage was there to be seen. So, this poem came out of that journey. Home. I am the blind woman finding her way home by a map of tune. When the song that is in me is the song I hear from the world, I'll be home. It's not written down and I don't remember the words, but I know when I hear it, I'll have made it myself, I'll be home. A version I heard once in Leitrim was close, a wet Tuesday night in the Shanrelig bar. I had come for the session, I stayed for the vision and lore. The landlord called time, the music dried up, the grace notes were pitched to the dark. When the jukebox blared out, I'd only 4 senses and he left me senseless. I'd no choice but to take to the road. On Grafton Street in November, I heard a mighty sound. A travelling man with a didgeridoo blew me clear to Botany Bay, the tune too far back to live in, but scribed on my bones. In a past life I must have been kangaroo, rocked in my dream time, convict ships coming o'er the foam. In the puzzle factory, one winter I was sure I was home. The talking in tongues, the riddles, the rhymes struck a chord that cut through the pharmaceutical haze. My rhythm, catatonic, I lulled myself back to the womb. My mother's heart beating, the drum of herself and her world. I was tricked by her undersong, just close enough to my own. I took then to dancing. I spun like a dervish. I swear, I heard the subtle music of the spheres. It's no place to live but out there in space on your own, hung aloft the night. The tune was in truth a mechanical drone. I was a pitiful monkey jigging on cue. I came back to earth with a land, to rain on my face, to sun in my hair, and grateful too. The wise women say you must live in your skin, call it home. No matter how battered or broken, misused by the world, you can heal. This morning a letter arrived on the 9 o'clock post, the Department of Historical Reparation. And who did I blame? The nuns, your mother, the state? Tick box provided, we'll consider your case. I'm burning my soapbox. I'm taking the very next train. A citizen of nowhere, nothing to my name. I'm on my last journey. Though my lines are all wonky, they spell me a map that makes sense, where the song that is in me is the song I hear from the world. I'll set down my burden and sleep. The spot that I lie on at last, the place I'll call home. Thank you. Okay. This, I suppose, where I live now, I was in a suburb outside Dublin. One of the great joys of my life was a small coastal meadow. And I think during our boom times, what was called the Celtic Tiger, I think everyone lost a field or some small space that suddenly became a site. People weren't selling houses with gardens, they were selling houses with sites. Everything was a site. So this is called death of a field. The field itself is lost the morning it becomes a site. When the notice goes up, Fingal County Council, 44 houses. The memory of the field is lost with the loss of its herbs. Though the wood pigeons in the willow, the finches in what's left of the hawthorn hedge, and the wagtail in the elder sing on their hungry summer song, the magpies sound like flying castanets. And the memory of the field disappears with its flora. Who can know the yearning of yarrow or the plight of the scarlet pimpernel, whose true colour is orange? The end of the field is the end of the hidey holes where first smokes, first tokes, first gropes were had to the scentless mayweed. The end of the field as we know it is the start of the estate, the site to be planted with houses, each 2 or 3 bedroom, nest of sorrow and chemical, cargo of joy. The end of dandelion is the start of flash. The end of dock is the start of pledge. The end of teasel is the start of aerial. The end of primrose is the start of brillo. The end of thistle is the start of bounce. The end of slow is the start of oxy-action. The end of herb Robert is the start of brasso. The end of eyebright is the start of Purcell, who amongst us is able to number the end of grasses, to number the losses of each seeding head? I'll walk out once barefoot under the moon to know the field, through the soles of my feet to hear the myriad leaf lives green and singing, the million cycles of being in wing, that before the field become map memory in some archive, on some architect's screen, I might possess it, or it possess me, through its night dew, its moon-white call, its slick and shine, and its profligacy in every wing beat, in every beat of time. This is a small poem for the spring, and then I'll finish with a slightly longer piece. Seed. The first warm day of spring, and I step out into the garden from the gloom of a house where hope had died, to tally the storm damage, to seek what may have survived. And finding some forgotten lupins I'd sown from seed last autumn, holding in their fingers a raindrop each, like a peace offering or a promise, I am suddenly grateful and would offer a prayer if I believed in God. But not believing, I bless the power of seed, its casual, useful persistence, and bless the power of sun, its conspiracy with the underground, and thank my stars the winter's ended. Now, this poem is called The Solace of Artemis. Artemis, as I'm sure you all know, was one of the Greek goddesses, older even than classical antiquity. And she has a long association with bears. In the classical period, her rituals were used young girls dressed in bear skins. A few years ago, about 3 years ago, research was published that's already changing the face of conservation around bears. It was research that took place in Trinity College Dublin, Oxford University here, and Penn State University in the States. And by examining 17 different samples of bear bones that they found in sites around Ireland, often at cave sites, and the bear is extinct in Ireland for about 12,000 years, they discovered in the mitochondrial DNA, that's the mother's link back through history, the mitochondrial DNA, they discovered that every single polar bear alive today has, as an ancestor, one Irish brown bear mother. Yeah. So this is The Solace of Artemis. It's dedicated to Katrina Crowe, one of our great national archivists. I read that every polar bear alive today has mitochondrial DNA from a common mother, an Irish brown bear who once roved out across the last ice age, and I am comforted. It has been a long, hot morning with the children of the machine, their talk of memory, of buying it cheap. But I, memory keeper by trade, scan time coded in the golden hive mind of eternity. I burn my books, I burn my whole archive, a blaze that sears, synapses flaring cell to cell, where memory sleeps in the wax hexagonals of my doomed and melting comb. I see him loping towards me across the vast ice field, to where I wait in the cave mouths, dreaming my cubs about the den, my honeyed ones, smelling of snow and sweet oblivion. Thank you very much for your attention tonight. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Paula Meehan. Now, I know perfectly well that I could end this nerve-wracking job that I ill-advisedly took on tonight by simply introducing our next guest by name. But it's an opportunity to say in public what so many hundreds of us, Irish poets, English poets, Welsh poets, Scots poets, have been saying for years, which is how much we love Carol Ann Duffy. Her generosity of spirit is quite extraordinary, as indeed is her ubiquity. I've long harboured the dark suspicion that there's a discreet industrial unit somewhere on the outskirts of Salford busy churning out cloned Carol Ann Duffys, because I don't know anybody who does as much for so many as Carol Ann does. Indeed, I cannot think of a living poet who has mastered so many voices, so much grief, so much mischief, so many extraordinary personifications, projections of the self. I began by quoting to you Nuala Ní Dhomhnall's lovely line, "The chudas magán vod srutna teangan." And I found, sort of blindly stabbing at all the books on the shelves and opening before, and I picked out a poem of Carol Ann's called Ship. In the end, it was nothing more than the toy boat of a boy on the local park's lake where I walked with you. But I knelt down to watch it arrive, its white sail shy with amber light, the late sun bronzing the wave that lifted it up, my ship coming in with its cargo of joy. I have to tell you that technically the Poet Laureate of England is a member of the Royal Court. And I can also tell you that in her own person, Carol Ann Duffy has effected a reconciliation that has not been imaginable for 800 years between these neighbouring islands, because I can think of nobody bearing any kind of royal imprimatur who is more royally and republicanly welcome in Ireland than Carol Ann Duffy is. I have no idea what genie of mischief was going on in John Samson's head when he chose to visit Henry VIII on us. But here, to introduce a woman I love, whom we all love, and whom we justly and properly admire, playing a piece composed by that notorious reprobate Henry VIII, called Pastime of Good Company, John Samson, to welcome your Poet Laureate, Carol Ann Duffy. Carol Ann Duffy.
Today, we have a poet in the class, a real live poet with a published book. Notice the ink-stained fingers, girls. Perhaps we're going to witness verse hot from the press, who knows? Please show your appreciation by clapping, not too loud. Now, sit up straight and listen. Remember the lesson on assonance, for not all poems, sadly, rhyme these days. Still, never mind. Whispering's, as always, out of bounds, but do feel free to raise some questions. After all, we're paying £40. Those of you with English second language see me after break. We're fortunate to have this person in our midst, season of mist and so on and so forth. I've written quite a bit of poetry myself. I'm doing Kipling with the lower fourth. Right, that's enough from me. On with the muse. Open a window at the back. We don't want winds of change about the place. Take notes, but don't write reams. Just an essay on the poet's themes. Fine, off we go. Convince us that there's something we don't know. Well, really. Run along now, girls. I'm sure that gave an insight to an outside view. Applause will do. Thank you very much for coming here today. Lunch in the hall? Do hang about. Unfortunately, I have to dash. Tracy will show you out. What an evening. The post office last year announced that when we write our letters, they don't want the names of the counties to be on the envelopes. They get in the way of the post code. And when I heard this, I was consumed with a kind of middle-aged fury. And I got it down to two reasons why I felt such anger. The first was childhood. Probably like many here, when I was a child, I loved to write my name and address in all my books. So in my case, it was Carol Ann Duffy, 21 Poplar Way, Moss-Pit, Staffordshire, England, Great Britain, Europe, the world, the solar system, the universe. My parents were Catholics, near God. And you really need the county in there to do that properly. And the second reason was poetry. Like all poets, I love to name, to celebrate in my poems, even to the extent of using the list as a form. And one of my favourite short lyric poems is that wonderful poem Adelstrop by Edward Thomas, which he wrote before the Great War. And in that poem, his old steam train chugs to a halt in the middle of England, and he listens to all the sounds and then names where he is. And I quote Edward Thomas at the end of The Counties. But I want to write to an Essex girl, greeting her warmly. But I want to write to a Shropshire lad, brave boy, home from the army. And I want to write to the Lincolnshire poacher to hear of his hair, and to an auntie in Bedfordshire who makes a wooden hill of her stair. But I want to post a rose to a Lancashire lass, red. I'll pick it. And I want to write to a Middlesex mate for tickets for cricket. But I want to write to the Ayrshire cheesemaker and his good cow. And it is my duty to write to the Queen at Berkshire in praise of Slough. Not really. But I want to write to the national poet of Wales at Ceredigion in celebration. And I want to write to the Dorset giant in admiration. And to the Inland Revenue in Yorkshire in desperation. But I want to write to my uncle in Clackmannanshire in his kilt. And to my scrumptious cousin in Somerset with her cidery lilt. But I want to write to two ladies in Denbighshire, near Llangollen, and I want to write to a laddie in Lanarkshire, dear Lachlan. But I want to write to the Cheshire cat, returning its smile. But I want to write the names of the counties down for my own child, and may they never be lost to her, all the birds of Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire. I think our bees are very much the canary in the mine at the moment, and the last collection of poems I published was called The Bees. And I was thinking and reading again that ancient connection between poets and bees, poets from Sylvia Plath to the wonderful young poet Sean Borrowdale. And the very first poet I'm aware of who wrote about bees was Virgil. Virgil's Bees. Bless air's gift of sweetness, honey from the bees, inspired by clover, marigold, eucalyptus, thyme, the 100 perfumes of the wind. Bless the beekeeper who chooses for her hives a site near water, violet beds, no you, no echo. Let the light lilt, leak, green or gold, pigment for queens, and joy be inexplicable, but there, in harmony of willow herb and stream, of summer heat and breeze, each bee's body at its brilliant flower, lover-stunned, strumming on fragrance, smitten. For this, let gardens grow where beelines end, sighing in roses, saffron blooms, buddleia, where bees pray on their knees, sing praise in pear trees, plum trees. Bees are the batteries of orchards, gardens. Guard them. Water. Your last word was water, which I poured in a hospice plastic cup, held to your lips, your small sip, half smile, sigh, then in the chair beside you fell asleep. Fell asleep for 3 lost hours, only to waken, thirsty, hear, then see, a magpie worn in a bush outside, dawn so soon, and swallow from your still full cup. Water, the times I'd call as a child for a drink, till you'd come, sit on the edge of the bed in the dark, holding my hand, just as we held hands now, and you died. A good last word. Night since, I've cried, but gone to my own child's side with a drink, watched her gulp it down, then sleep. Water, what a mother brings through darkness still to her parched daughter. I mentioned lots of places in the counties, and here's another place, Liverpool, a city I love very much, and was at university. And when I was at university, I used to go to all the home games at Anfield, Liverpool on my team. And I always felt very sorrowful for the people who died at Hillsborough and the long, long years of struggle that their families had to get to the truth. So this sonnet I wrote just over a year ago when the Hillsborough report was published. Liverpool. The cathedral bell tolled, could never tell, nor the liver birds, mute in their stone spell, or the Mersey, the seagulls wailed, cursed overhead, in no language for the slandered dead. Not the raw red throat of the cop, keening, or the cop's words, censored of meaning, not the clock, slow hand-clapping the coroner's deadline, or the memo to Thatcher, or the tabloid headline. but fathers told of their daughters. The names of sons on the lips of their mothers were prayers, lost ones, honoured for bitter years by orphan, cousin, wife. Not a matter of football, but of life. Over this great city, light after long dark, and truth, the sweet silver song of a lark. In parts of China, the plight of bees, largely because of colony collapse disorder, which means that one morning the beekeeper will go to the hives and the bees have lost their way, have not returned. Farmers are employing people in quite large numbers to pollinate their orchards by hand, and if this is not done, they will have no fruit. The human bee. I became a human bee at 12 when they gave me my small wand, my flask of pollen, and I walked with the other bees out to the orchards. I worked first in apples, climbed the ladder into the childless arms of a tree and busied myself dipping and tickling, duping and tackling, tracing the petals' guidelines down to the stigma. Human, humming, I knew my lessons by heart. The ovary would become the fruit, the ovule the seed, fertilized by my golden touch, my Midas dust. I moved to lemons, head and shoulders lost in blossom, dawn till dusk, my delicate blessing. All must be docile, kind, unfraught for one fruit. Pomegranate, lychee, nectarine, peach, the rhymeless orange. And if an opening bud was out of range, I'd jump from my ladder onto a branch and reach. So that was my working life as a bee, till my eyesight blurred. My hand was a trembling bird in the leaves, the bones of my fingers thinner than one's. And when they retired me, I had my wine from the silent vines, and I'd known love, and I'd saved some money, but I could not fly, and I made no honey. And the next poem takes a great figure from mythology, Atlas. And I imagine the reality of Atlas in such darkness as we share, holding our planet on his shoulders. Atlas. Give him strength, crouched on one knee in the dark with the earth on his back, balancing the 7 seas, the oceans 5, kneeling in ruthless, empty, endless space, for grace of whale, dolphin, sea lion, shark, seal, fish, every kind which swarms the waters. Hero. Hard, too, heavy to hold, the mountains, burn of his neck and arms taking the strain. Andes, Himalayas, Kilimanjaro, give him strength. He heaves them high to harvest rain from skies for streams and rivers. He holds the rivers, holds the Amazon, Ganges, Nile. Hero, hero. Hired by no one, heard in a myth only, lonely, he carries a planet's weight, islands and continents, the billions there. His ears, the last to hear their language, music, gunfire, prayer. Give him strength, strong girth, for elephants, tigers, snow leopards, polar bears, bees, bats, the last ounce of a hummingbird. Broad-backed in infinite bleak black, he bears where earth is, nowhere, head bowed, a genuflection to the shouldered dead, the unborn's hero. He is love's lift. Sometimes the moon rolled to his feet, a gift. I read just before a poem called Water about my mother, and I'd like for my penultimate poem to read another poem from my mother. And this poem works as a kind of resurrection in the sense that in the poem I run time backwards. I imagine that the very first moment I ever meet my mother is at the moment of her death, when I was with her. And we get to know each other in reverse. Premonitions. We first met when your last breath cooled in my palm like an egg. You dead, and a bird outside sang it was morning. I backed out of the room, feeling the flowers freshen and shine in my arms. The night before, we met again to unsay unbearable farewells, to see our eyes brighten with re-strung tears. Oh, I had my sudden wish, though I barely knew you, to stand at the door of your house, feeling my heartbeat calm as they carried you in, home and healing. Then slow weeks, removing the wheelchair, the drugs, the oxygen mask and tank, the commode, the appointment cards, until it was summer again, and I saw you open the doors to the grace of your garden. Strange and beautiful to see the flowers close to their own premonitions, the grass sweeten and cool and green, where a bee swooned backwards out of a rose. There you were, a glass of lemony wine in each hand, walking towards me always, your magnolia tree marrying itself to the May air. How you talked, and how I listened, spellbound, humbled, daughterly, to your tall tales, your wise words, the joy of your accent, un-English, dancey, humorous, watching your ash hair flare and redden, the loving litany of who we had been, making me place my hands in your warm hands, younger than mine are now. Then time, only the moon, and the balm of dusk, and you, my mother. I started with a school poem, and I'd like to finish with a little extract from a very, very long poem I wrote called The Laughter of Stafford Girls High. And this poem concerns an epidemic of laughter which breaks out in a girls' school, and it continues for nearly a year. And the poem is looking particularly on the effects of this hysteria and wildness and hilarity on the staff, the establishment. And the headmistress of the school is called Dr. Bream, and after nearly a year, she has to come to a very hard decision. So I'll just finish with what happens here. Dr. Bream read through the letter to parents, then signed her name at the end. The school was to close at the end of term until further notice. A dozen resignation notes from the staff lay on her desk. The head put her head in her hands and wept. A local journalist lurked at the gates. Senora Devises and Miss Nadim Barber entered the room to say that the girls were filing into the hall for the special assembly. There was still no sign of Mrs. Mackay. She looked at the shattered head, and Kipling sprang to Miss Nadim Barber's lips. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, Senora Devises joined in. Persist! The head got to her feet and straightened her back. And so, Dr. Bream summed up, you girls have laughed this once great school into the ground. Senora Devises plans to return to Spain. Cries of, Olé! Miss Batt and Miss Fife have resigned. Wolf whistles. Mrs. Prendergast is joining the Theatre Royal. A round of applause crashed on the boards like surf. The head stared at the laughing girls, then turned and marched from the stage, clipped up the polished corridor, banged through the double doors, crunched down the gravel drive to the staff car park and into her car. Elvis, shrieked Caroline Joan from the hall, has left the building. A cheer like an avalanche rolled on the roof. The captain of sports slipped from her seat and followed Miss Dunn. The girls burst into song as their mute teachers walked from the stage, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land.